Chapter 39, Strange Bedfellows. Strange bedfellows. Next to her, something hissed and crackled. Frithha focused on the noise, at length identifying its source as the fire, and she suddenly awakened to countless other sensations, the cool morning air against her eyelids, the ground hard beneath her, and the dull throb that lingered in her temples from the night's wine. There was something heavy over her, too, trapping in the heat of her curled body, the scent that clung to it somehow familiar, of wood smoke and metal polish, and she realized with reluctant tremor it was a no-man's cloak. For a time, she just lay there, letting the moments drift by while hidden within that cocoon, breathing in the scent of a man who had once been hers and reveling in the memory of the warm security that came with knowing there was one person who held you above all else. But it could not last. Come on, just 3 more breaths. 1, 2, 3. Frithha heaved it off and sat in a single movement, brisk air rushing to set the skin of her whole body bristling, the sky above a glorious palette of fiery pinks. The camp about her was all but deserted, their 5 tents pitched in an uneven ring, the eastern pane of each cast white in the sunrise, while the shaded sides still glistened with the night's dew. A no-man was stooped over the pot, the tea leaves he was stirring left to drift for but a moment as he glanced briefly to her. Frithha felt her stomach flip, it was not a pleasant sensation.
Morning, a no-man. Yes, good morning. Thanks for, well.
She folded his cloak demonstratively over her arm and set it neatly on the blanket next to her. A no-man did not look up, the silence pressed her on.
Did you take everyone's watch? Solifane and Valigar relieved me in the early hours.
Frithha threw a glance to the tents behind her.
They are back in bed.
Training, came the grunt. Frithha watched him stir the steeping tea with a ponderous hand. She had hoped the cloak might have meant a reconciliation of sorts, it seemed she was mistaken.
A no-man, last night. Ah, and the first of our revelers is awake.
Jahara stepped from her tent, the woman more cheerful than Frithha was used to seeing her, even considering the hour, a warm smile beaming as she joined them at the fire.
And suffering for her indulgence? No, not really.
Though it seemed Frithha may have spoken too soon. She stifled a hiss, sharp pain shooting through her back as she stretched. A no-man did not comment, he did not even look at her. Jahara was not so dismissive.
Frithha. I'm all right, just a twinge. You likely slept awkwardly. Yes, must have. I imagine I feel better than some though.
Frithha laughed at the tousled head that had emerged from the tent behind them. Imoen was pale, the contrast with her darkened hair making it all the more noticeable, clothes thrown on with the air of someone who tried to dress whilst still under the blankets.
Oh, Jahara,
she croaked dramatically,
I think I'm dying.
Valigar lunged, his sword thrust in from the side in a curving stab in a move he had seen few times and practiced even fewer. The kata to which he were accustomed were more flowing, continual styles, broad sweeps melding into a smooth dance. Using the blade with mainly one hand required a change of technique, shorter movements concentrated on sharp lunges and stabs, his injured hand used more to steady and pivot. He was fortunate his blade was so light, a sword like Minsk's, and he would have been forced to find himself a whole new weapon. The thrust was not fast enough to catch his opponent though. Solifane dodged the strike, sword poised to sweep at his extended arm. The ranger snatched it back, returning to a close guard and fighting the temptation to grip with both hands as he prepared to parry the coming blow. The drow redirected his attack, whipping around, the momentum carrying his blade up to press the blow to the ranger's shoulder. Valigar moved to parry, the angle of his body twisting his sword arm, free hand brought to the hilt in his instinct to save it, and pain flared through his injured arm as the blade clattered to the ground. Solifane did not even bother to follow through on the strike. The duel was over, the man stepping back, and for a moment they just stood there, a few paces apart, heaving chests misting in the cold air. Valigar threw a scowl to the blade at his feet, feeling somehow betrayed by it. Opposite him, the drow sheathed his own sword, the awkward shift to his feet not reflected in his even tone.
Your skills are improving.
Valigar snorted, aching fingers flexed with a grimace.
I would still be dead were this a true duel.
Solifane was frowning.
Perhaps we should cease now. After I master this. Pain and fatigue are no teacher.
The coiled anger within finally snapped.
Do not coddle me. I am not a child.
Valigar finished lamely, he certainly sounded like one. Solifane was friend enough not to make the obvious comparison, the man impassive before him, grey eyes holding no pity or judgment. Valigar could not bear to meet them, gaze dropped to the useless claw that no longer felt a part of him. However many times he told himself it could have been so much worse, it did nothing to ease that sense of loss.
It was one thing of which I could be proud. I was born to so many of the advantages others craved, money, status, even that curse of magic in my blood. But the strength of my being, my skill with blade and bow, I earned that. And now it is gone. One hand does not make a whole man,
offered Solifane quietly.
No,
Valigar sighed, dropping to a crouch to take up his dropped blade, the fine metal dulled by the dust that clung to its film of oil.
And many times I have heard Minsk rattle off a list of the woodman's skills which do not require either hand. But it still does not return what I have lost. It is early yet. Yes, and once the pain fades and the swelling reduces, there will be time to train my hand anew, Jahara reminds me almost daily. But it will never be as it was, and until then.
He cleaned the blade upon his knee and straightened in one decisive movement.
I am useless to this group.
Solifane snorted.
I would say it is your attitude that is your greatest impairment at the moment. Is that so?
Snapped Valigar.
And how do the drow treat those who are crippled?
A mere twitch of nostrils on that impassive face was enough to betray his displeasure, though Solifane answered all the same.
There are exceptions, of course, but those who become thus in battle are killed by their allies as a mercy. Those born with any imperfection are killed then. It is seen as a sign of disfavor from Lolth, and such children would be considered a burden to their houses. A burden?
Valigar snorted bitterly.
To think that was once how I considered you.
If Solifane was offended by the admission, he did not show it.
This group tolerates no burdens. It did not then, it does not now.
Valigar drew a deep breath, the faint scent of cooking carried to him on the bracing air.
Come, we should return to camp.
Fritha took the gnarled twist of pale root from the cup, waiting as the last few drops of tea sent ripples across the surface, before the soggy length was discarded to the fire with a hiss. Jahara glanced up with a smile, the pot of tea now set aside to make room for the group's heavy skillet as she fried slices of dried sausage over the licking flames. The druid had walked into the village with Minsk after Fritha and Imoen had left for the tavern last night, heading to Simon to replenish their supplies. Fritha imagined she was not only one who was glad they had that morning's breakfast, a welcome plate of sausage, cheese, and warmed flat bread. The smell was delicious, but it was not to everyone's tastes, it seemed. Behind her, Imoen was sitting on the blankets that were still laid out from the night before, head resting in her bent knees as she tried to accustom her eyes to the light.
Here,
Fritha smiled, carefully passing her the cup.
I let one of those roots Jahara has steep in it a while, it should help your head. Ah, thanks,
the girl sighed, inhaling a rousing lungful of fragrant steam. The scalding heat curbed her attempts to drink it quickly though, and Imoen settled on a long, slurping sip.
Gods, Fritha, why'd you let me drink all that wine? I told you to go easy on it. And bloody vowels, making me drink that entire flask of water, all night I was up and down like a fiddler's elbow.
Fritha snorted, though the girl was feeling bad now, at least the evening seemed to have found them friends again. Across the camp, a no-man was brooding into his cup, Minsk's attempts to engage him ignored. Well, 1 out of 2 wasn't bad going.
Ah, name a devil,
continued Imoen, the girl perking up considerably as Solafane and Valigar appeared over the bluffs, the man raising a hand to her before following the drow over to his tent as they finished their discussion. Imoen watched greedily as Solafane stooped to his pack and hauled his tunic over his head to reveal the tightly muscled body beneath.
You can say what you like, Fritha, but you can't deny the man's fine.
Fritha laughed.
You're such a lecher. Sola, put your tunic back on before Imoen passes out. Oh, fetch me my smelling salts,
the girl cried, setting down her cup to skip over to the pair. The drow hastily pulled on a clean tunic.
Don't worry, Sola, I only have eyes for one man here,
she giggled, turning a beaming smile on the man next to him.
How was training? Fine,
muttered Valigar. Imoen seemed to know not to press him further.
Good then. Breakfast.
Valigar and Solafane were the last to join the circle, Jahara putting a wedge of cheese, a few slices of sausage and hunk of flatbread onto each plate. Fritha poured 2 last cups of tea for the latecomers to settle again and, as they ate, talk turned inevitably from Fritha and Imoen's evening to their plans for that day.
Well, I bought enough for a few days from Simon last night,
offered Jahara to the question on their supplies.
We'll need to visit the well and fill the flasks before we leave, too,
said Fritha.
I can go after breakfast.
Next to her, Minsk laughed.
No, young Fritha, Boo says such work is not for maids, I will go.
A nod from Solafane.
I will join you, Minsk. So we set out for Sendai then,
confirmed Valigar.
And what of Melissan? What would you have us do instead?
Asked a no-man sharply.
How can we fight that which we cannot find? Perhaps seek her.
Valigar retorted.
She set much in motion, gathering the children at Saradush for the giant, bringing them here, sending us out to kill her rivals. She has a plan that will likely succeed and it seems we playing right into it.
Minsk was nodding, his mellow voice a welcome step back from the escalating tempers.
And yet a no-man is right, good Valigar. An army is raised and we must act against it and trust to the fates that we will have Melissan in time. Sendai and Melissan,
Imoen considered aloud,
the last 2 members of the 5. We assume,
reminded Solafane.
There could be others, outside of their group.
Fritha speared a piece of sausage with her knife.
Yes, well, I'd like to think if there were any more players in this they'd have made themselves known by now. Are we so sure?
Countered Valigar.
They may not even be gathering within Tethur. Well, then they are definitely someone else's problem,
said Imoen. Fritha was shaking her head.
No, they will not be anywhere else. Baal's main temples were here. Tethur was the seat of his power, Tethur will be the cradle of his resurrection. Lucky old Tethur,
laughed Imoen grimly.
Who says at least we are here to stop it? Lucky old us,
muttered Fritha.
Melissan and Sendai, the 2 final pieces of this game to be taken.
She leaned forward, using the handle of her knife to trace 2 symbols into the dirt, a dagger for the drow, a skull for the priestess.
We know where one is and we know where the other is going. We do?
Asked Imoen.
Watcher's Keep,
provided Inomen gruffly.
Melisande said so before she left. Well, I was meaning the throne of Baal,
conceded Fritha.
But good point. Now, according to Melisande, Sendai raises an army in the west.
She circled the dagger at her feet.
Could she have been lying?
Poised Valigar. Fritha pondered it with a frown.
Doubtful, what would she gain by it? Perhaps we should see if we cannot call a truce with this Sendai,
offered Jaehaera.
Melisande is enemy to us both. And allow the drow even more time to raise an army.
Snapped Inomen. The druid was ready to stand her ground.
Melisande seeks the throne, how many more will suffer if she ascends as murder's new goddess? She could even have her own army stashed somewhere,
offer Imoen practically.
Tether's big enough.
Fritha nodded.
We don't yet know enough about Melisande's plans, though no doubt she has them. I wonder what she wanted at Watcher's Keep, if she went there at all. In the end though, she will have to face us. Will she?
Countered Jaehaera.
She could bring about our end through other means. She was manipulative enough to work within the 5, while plotting their ends,
reminded Valigar. Fritha puffed her frustrations at the ground, dust stirring across the symbols.
Too many uncertainties.
Across the camp, Solophane's head darted back.
We have visitors.
And over the bluff they came, 2 monks she did not recognize, whose easy stride belied the climb they had just had. Their cowls were back, both men wearing the customary knee-length robes and bound-in trousers of their order, their shaved heads shining in the early light.
Greetings,
began the elder of the 2 as he stepped into the ring of tents. He was a dark-skinned man of middling years. His young companion halted on the edge of their camp in respectful silence.
I bring word from High Master Balthazar.
Dark eyes found Fritha in the circle.
He wishes to speak with you, godchild. What, now?
Came Imoen, her breakfast half finished in her lap. The man merely nodded. Fritha heaved herself up with a sigh.
Fair enough, I'll bring one other. Sola, oh, Imoen!
She exclaimed as the girl opposite stood along with the drow. Imoen arched an eyebrow at her, hand moved to hip in unconscious challenge.
Well, I'm a ball spawn, too.
An instant of embarrassed silence as the 3 just stared at each other. Jaehaera broke the tension with a sigh, reluctantly setting down her plate to turn to the waiting monk.
We shall all attend.
They took the most direct route to the monastery, bypassing the village completely to skirt the western edge of the bluffs, 1 monk before their group and the other following behind as they reached the northern cliffs. From that high, Fritha had a view down into the gorge and the now empty desert. Lucaille had the camp's faith it seemed, the ballspawn were gone, down to the last tent, the refuse they had left being slowly swallowed by the sands. Before them, the walls of the monastery towered, they had arrived. The plain wooden gates opened upon a large courtyard that curved back into a natural shelf in the cliffs. To the left, a barn and wells, while beyond them 2 low, clay brick buildings stood, likely dormitories from the number of windows. But the largest structure by far stretched to their right, running the remaining length of the cliffs, crenulations about its flat roof and a circular turret at either end reaching up past the walls to mirror the mountain peaks far above them. In the space before it, robed men and women were grouped by age and being led in various fighting stances, while dotted across the yard others fetched scrolls, laundry, and supplies back and forth between the scattered buildings, all moving with same steady gait, and Fritha was stuck by the silent industry, like hive of untiring, mindless ants.
"Oh, it's yummy,"
cried Imoen, spotting the dark-haired girl instructing a group of younger children in their drills.
"Hey, yummy."
The girl glanced to them and nodded once, half, turning back to her young charges.
"What's wrong with her?"
The elder monk had Imoen's answer.
"None are allowed to speak within these walls unless addressed by a superior."
Imoen took this revelation in her stride, some of the younger acolytes hiding laughter behind their long cuffs as she sent the girl an enthusiastic wave.
"I'll talk to you later, Yemi."
Yemi dipped her face against the emerging smile. Their guide seemed less amused.
"This way, if you please."
He led them onward, through the main door of the dormitory just before them, and Fritha was soon lost in a maze of cool corridors all covered floor to ceiling in the same terracotta tiles. The air echoed with their footsteps and she felt very conscious of the racket they were making. The monks had removed their sandals at the entrance. Up a flight of similarly tiled steps, and they reached the end of a long corridor to pause before a wooden door that was conspicuous only by its plainness. The monk knocked twice, opened the door and smartly turned on his heel to leave, Fritha the first to take a tentative step over the threshold. The room beyond was large enough, and made to seem all the larger by the lack of furniture. A chest, pallet, and wash basin had been pushed to the walls to leave a large space before the only window, and before it, upon a thin reed mat, he sat in the same plain robes of his brothers, Balthazar. He was a short, wiry man of the local coloring, closer to the age Saravak would have been now, with thin dark eyebrows and sharp brown eyes. His head was shaved as the other men there, his skull adorned with an intricate pattern of tattoos. Before the mat, 2 low benches had been placed, presumably for their benefit, the man gesturing politely to them as they entered. He moved slow and precisely, as though no movement was to be wasted, the man waiting for them to settle before he spoke.
"I am Balthazar,"
he began, his voice mellow, quiet even, as though he was very accustomed to people listening to him.
"You are Fritha, and you?"
He turned to the girl perched at the end next to Valigar.
"Are Imoen. I am glad you have come. Much has changed since you left to kill Abizigal." "Your attitude for one,"
said Fritha.
"You did not seem too keen to speak to us before." "I am not now. The children are a blight on, not just this land, but all Toril."
He paused, a quiver twitching his upper lip as though he found their mere presence there distasteful.
"But, despite your heritage, recent actions mark you as an ally. I note you moved the children's camp on. I assume you, too, are now suspicious of Melisand's intentions." "What makes you think we had anything to do with it?"
asked Imoen, bluntly folding her arms.
"I have my sources. But, even had I not, it is a startling coincidence that they depart the day after your return. Where have they gone?"
Fritha watched the man watch her, strong hands laid mildly in his lap. She could lie here, feign ignorance and reason that some message from Melisande must have moved them on. But he was not the woman's ally, perhaps he could be theirs.
"Supposing we did encourage them to leave, I would have suggested they travel north, back to Saradush and Marmont, to hide in the more populated areas there."
Balthazar's face was a mask.
"A wise course." "You spoke of an alliance,"
prompted Jahara, clearly tired of this wary dance.
"Yes, I did. Did you know that it is your former ally Melisande who is the final member of the 5 you seek?"
Fritha shrugged.
"We suspected as much. Did you know she is, in fact, the Deathstalker, Amlisan the Blackheart?"
The slightest quirk to his eyebrow told her he had not.
"Interesting, but ultimately of little consequence,"
he conceded at last.
Melisande has been manipulating you into killing her rivals that she may ascend in Bal's stead. This cannot happen. Well, we're all in agreement there, mate,
snorted Imoen. At her side, Valigar was frowning deeply.
And what concern is it of yours? It is the concern of every man and woman within these walls, as well I thought you would know. This order was created long ago, before the time of troubles. A monk by the name of Uljet was blessed with a vision of a future time, and the coming of the cursed ones. He saw what would happen should the curse remain within the land. In his wisdom, he came here to Tethur where he knew this evil would arise, and founded this monastery. 4 centuries we have waited, watching events unfold, awaiting the day when we would have our chance to end this curse. That time is now upon us. You have a way to end the curse,
cried Imoen. Fritha felt her heart sink, the man sealing her torment with a stoic nod.
We do.
Imoen was gaping, trying to find the words in her shock.
And you can end it? Just like that?
Fritha could not look at her, gaze fixed on the impassive figure before them.
How? I will not reveal such knowledge to outsiders,
he dismissed,
but we do have an end for this curse and I will see it carried out. We work towards it even now, but the 5 could still ruin this long-laid plan. If they can resurrect Bal before I can finish the preparations here, all will be lost. Melisande knows this and has manipulated Sendai into attacking us here. That is why our aid to the village was sacrificed in order to hire these mercenaries. There are enough forces here in the Order and those Cell Swords who have gathered to hold her back for a 10-day, perhaps longer, though Amkathran will undoubtedly suffer should war come here.
Fritha snorted, if that was all he had to bargain with.
In case you haven't noticed, there is not much of this village left for you to be concerned about. You believe her army will just march here peaceably?
He countered.
Sendai will cut a swathe through this land to reach us. And how did you come to know all this?
Came Imoen skeptically.
Bal's taint is abomination onto real. When 5 of the children so steeped in it surfaced, I took great interest in them. Those of this order were sent out as spies to learn of their plans.
A scowl to break that serene facade.
I learned too late that Melisande was behind it all. So you want us to kill Sendai for you,
supplied Fritha. Balthazar bobbed his head in what could have been a shrug.
What you decide to do will be your own choice, but know this, eventually Sendai will come here and there will be war. The only way to avoid this will be to assassinate the women before she can finalize her plans. No one here could manage this task, but my brothers brought rumors from the local desert tribes that the Dragon Lord who once stalked the Agazaran now lies dead. It was you, was it not?
Fritha merely inclined her head in admission.
If we kill Sendai, there may be enough essence gathered for Melisande to ascend. If you kill Sendai, there will be enough for us to complete our task,
the man countered.
The woman is mortal and no threat, of this I am sure, but if her part in this still worries you, I will devote my resources to searching for her while you are away. You will return here and the curse will be ended. I have told you what I know and what will happen, what you do with this knowledge is up to you. Kill Sendai and I'll tell you of Melisande.
Fritha threw the apple core into the now smoldering embers of their fire and stabbed up the cheese from her plate.
Since when did I become the Fates' hatchetman?
With little other option, their breakfast had just been placed in their tents when they had left, their return an hour or so later finding the sausage cooled but perfectly edible. Jahara had produced some apples and pot of honey and they had all settled down once more to take very early lunch. Yet, considered Imoen, hunk of flatbread passed halfway to her mouth,
but that stuff about him being able to end the curse sounded promising.
Fritha said nothing, she was too busy smothering that vain flicker of hope.
Indeed,
huffed Valigar, a monumental effort going into tearing the flatbread he held, one clawed hand trembling with the effort. Imoen pretended not to notice, he only snapped at offers to help.
But Balthazar is definitely hiding something. He has a greater interest in this than he is admitting. Something more than an interest, I would imagine,
said Jahara.
What was it that monk you discovered at Abizagal said, Firtha? That his mission there had failed. There was a monk there,
cried Imoen.
You never said. We forgot,
said Firtha, chewing the smoky cheese and trying not to think again on that murky room, the way the torches had glinted upon all those knives.
Forgot,
repeated Inomen crossly.
Too much is forgotten in this group. Half of us left in the dark, while others hoard their secrets. We meant to tell you,
Firtha sighed, ignoring the subtle dig at her,
it was just lost in what came after.
That silenced him, the man going back to his food with a scowl.
I wonder what the mission was,
pondered Imoen. Soliphane shrugged.
Perhaps he was one of the spies of which Balthazar spoke. Or there to warn against Melisand's treachery,
offered Jahara. Firtha let their talk drift over her, raising a hand to her eyes to gaze at the monastery that loomed dark and somber upon the cliffs opposite.
I almost wish we could leave someone here to keep an eye on things. We could ask Simon,
offered Imoen. Firtha nodded.
That's a good idea.
Inomen snorted.
That snake, he will afford us no aid. He will,
pressed Firtha, feeling the certainty of it within.
I'll talk to him. And as for the plan...
She thrust her knife into the outline of a dagger in the dirt at her feet.
Sendai has always been marked.
They left the others packing up the camp. Inomen had wanted to make his prayers at the village shrine, Firtha offering to join him on her way down to see Simon, to the priest's overwhelming indifference. She had hoped the walk would allow them a chance to talk and fix what was still clearly broken between them. After her tears the night before, Inomen had fallen back into silence and, with little else to do, she had returned to her book. As for that afternoon, after her first few questions had been dismissed with one-word answers, she had given up to walk meekly at his side in the oppressive, restless silence that had carried them all the way through the village. They were almost there now. The main square was empty, dusty ground littered with broken bottles and cups. It was debris from the gatherings that happened there after dark, the space kept clear in the day by the beating sun. Well, mostly, Firtha conceded. Above the steps to the village hall, someone had hung a blanket, men gathered in the shade beneath drinking, and Firtha felt the blush behind to rise as she recognized more than a few members of the Red Talons, a very familiar blonde head among them.
Freya!
Came the surprised call.
Oh hello, Hazel,
she greeted awkwardly, Inomen coming to a halt at her side as she stopped before the steps. Hazel was smiling broadly from his seat upon the low railing.
Freya, I did not think I would see you again. I had heard that all your kin had left with the dawn. We, stayed behind to wait for some stragglers still hunting in the desert. We'll be off this afternoon though. Where are you all going?
Asked one of his friends, a swarthy man with a thick, bushy beard. Firtha shrugged.
North, I think. Our headman says it's too hard to survive here. We manage, don't we, lads?
Laughed another, prompting a chorus of body cheers.
Well, that is a shame, continued Hazel. Can you stay for a drink with us?
Next to her, Inomen snorted impatiently. Firtha sent the mercenary an apologetic smile.
Sorry, I don't think so.
Hazel bore the disappointment well, eyes narrowed by the mild smile.
Well, safe journeys to you, until we meet again. Friends of yours?
Asked a Nomen coolly, when they were a few paces away.
Just some people Imoen and I met last night.
More silence. Fritha truly didn't know what to say anymore. She had never felt so uncomfortable around the man, even back in when every other exchange between them had been an argument. They would be at the edge of the square soon and any chance for reconciliation would be gone. Fritha screwed up her courage.
Anomen, we didn't really get a good chance to talk last. And we are here,
he announced sharply, coming to a halt but halfway along the courtyard.
Or near enough. I think you waste your efforts with Simon, but you know your own mind. I will see you back at camp.
And there he left her forlornly watching his retreating form cross the dusty square, the shadows swallowing him as he disappeared to the narrow alley beside the disused temple. She really didn't know what else to do to make things right between them. Melancholy flared to anger at the utter injustice of it all, her hand raised before she had realized to throw a rude gesture to his back. Appreciative chuckling from the steps. Fritha whirled to find more than just Hazel grinning, the fair man raising his cup to her in friendly salute. She allowed herself a tired smile and set out once more, and to think, Brianna had come down there to help her. They left Amcathran early that afternoon, walking well into the dusk before they stopped to make camp. 2 days' travel had taken them west along the desert's edge and back to the main road on which they had first journeyed south, and they had been on that path and traveling north through the plains ever since. The roads were quiet that close to the border, perhaps too quiet for the season, with no rumble of caravans to break the monotonous tramp of footsteps. That night had found them camped there on the edge of the road, tired and wayworn under a field of glittering stars. The evening meal was eaten and cleared away by now, and all but Anomen sat about the small fire. The man had disappeared to make his prayers over an hour ago. He was still avoiding Fritha's attempts to reconcile them, and after the first couple of days, the girl had stopped trying, discouraged by the worry she was just making matters worse. Fritha peeled her tongue from her palate. The salted pork had left her thirsty, but she resisted the urge to drain the last mouthful from her flask just yet. The arid plains grew more lush with each passing day, but water would still be rationed for a time yet, and she had long ago resigned herself to the grimy feel of her body in the same stale tunic, her hair lank with the grease and sweat. Those about her looked little better, and she spared a glance to the man next to her. The drow looked just as filthy, his lank, white hair scraped back into its tie, clothes grey with dust from the road. Solifane was apparently reading, though the pages did not turn with any regularity, and she suspected he was merely using the book as excuse to avoid conversation. He had been withdrawn since they had left Amcathran, though he was hardly alone in that. Many times Fritha found herself starting from a dream at some address, more often than not awakening to a frustrated Imoen. There was another among them who was behaving oddly. So restless one moment and apathetic the next, Imoen snapped at anyone who questioned it and complained near constantly of being tired, though she retired early each evening. She was practically asleep now. The girl stretched out and flopped sideways across Valigar's lap like a lethargic cat.
Gods, this country is too hot. Boo and I are in agreement with you, young Imoen,
Minsk grumbled, removing the glistening sheen of sweat from his bald head with a grubby handkerchief, his hamster having a wash of his own on the flattened grass at his feet.
Well, we are heading north,
offered Jahara practically,
and it will be cooler once we are in the forests. And how many days until then?
Sighed Imoen.
About a fortnight. We'll head north to the river, then travel west on the Memni Way. Melisand's guide placed Sendai in the Apogis, but the forest covers many leagues on both sides of the river, it could take a while to find her. We could have reached the Aegis again by midsummer,
Fritha offered to no one in particular. Imoen bolted upright, suddenly all energy.
Well, the sooner we get there the better. Ah!
The girl squealed, arms thrown about Valigar in her sudden excitement.
We're nearly there, we kill this Sendai, the monks can end the curse and it's all finally over. Don't get your hopes up,
warned Fritha quickly.
And why the hell's not?
Imoen demanded.
It's not like we've any great plan to end it. And what is his?
Countered Fritha.
I'm not saying you can't get excited, but be careful. We don't know enough of Balthazar to trust him yet. We know he's leader of an order who are devoted to ending this curse, even Melisande told us that much. And despite your lies to Lucail, he never did anything to the children camped in Amcathran, and why would he?
Imoen reasoned.
He must know that to kill all the Baalspawn will only allow Baal to come back. Or is that you just don't like any plan where you're not the big hero? Imoen, that was unfair,
scolded Jaehaera.
Sorry, I'm just too hot.
Imoen sighed, raking expressive hands up through her dark chestnut hair.
Can't you be a bit excited, Fritha? I need this. I need something hold on to that isn't just our best guess. I am excited,
Fritha lied. Well, the constant nausea since she had learned of it almost made that a half-truth.
But there are lots of different prophecies and not all of them can be right. I don't want to see you disappointed. Why don't we do some studying?
She continued more brightly, reaching for her bag and the tome she knew was within.
I can test you on your runes. No,
groaned Imoen,
I'm bored of runes. We could read over the last of the tome you brought from the Amma, if you wish,
offered Valigar. Imoen gave his knee a friendly squeeze and made to her feet.
Nah, I'm feeling a bit tired actually. I might turn in, you on first watch.
Valigar was, the girl leaving him there with a kiss as she headed for their tent, dragging her pack with her.
I believe we would all benefit from retiring early tonight,
announced Jaehaera.
Who is on first watch with you, Valigar? Anomen,
said the man gruffly. A moment of camp-wide silence reflected their sympathy. Valigar was in for a long night. Jaehaera cast into the plains about them with a frown.
I would have thought he would be returned by now.
Fritha's legs throbbed in protest to the movement.
I'll go tell him.
Solafane had offered to join her, his eyes better suited to their task, and it was not long before he had determined their direction, the Helmite apparently a speck of distant heat upon the plains. The drow glanced to her in the darkness, the starlight enough to highlight his brow and cheeks, silver eyes bright within the dark mask of his face.
You have been very quiet these last few days. So have you.
He faltered, seemingly caught out.
I did not want to press you. I know this talk of an end to the curse has been playing on your mind, how do you feel about it?
Fritha just sighed, sure it was not the whole of it, but too tired to question him further.
How do I feel?
She repeated, the weary smile creeping in.
Scared, to be honest. That Balthazar is lying. That he's telling the truth. I was set, Solafane, I was ready, and now someone else has a plan that could save us all, and Imoen is on a cloud, and all I know is that I can't do this again. I can't allow myself to dream of a future only to have it snatched away from me. If any have an instinct for this, it is you,
he reasoned.
What do you feel? That's just it.
She cried, frustrated that after everything she was still so unsure.
I feel the throne is mine, that I need to reach for the power to take it, but how much of that is really me? The fates are with you,
he reminded.
Is it the fates? There are many other forces in this world, and not all benevolent or even neutral. Maybe Imoen's right. Maybe I'm just desperate to believe I'm special, so at least then all this misery is for some greater cause, not just my appalling bad luck. Even with what it would mean for you in the end.
Scoffed Solifane, he clearly didn't think she was faking it.
I don't know. Gods, I can't keep second-guessing myself like this. I was saved by dragons when mere moments from death. Coincidences like this don't happen without help.
Firm hands gripped her shoulders, pressing that piece into her.
Calm yourself, Fritha. Now, close your eyes.
She did as instructed, drawing a deep breath in along with it, that resolved, mellow voice almost hypnotic.
Now, what do you feel?
A woman swathed in bright red hair, the sun-warmed stone of the courtyard where children gathered, taking the honeyed milk that would be their supper, the older women laughing with the temple guards, and all through her that feeling of utter wholeness.
I am chosen.
Someone intoned firmly, and she realized with surprise it had been she. Solifane nodded once.
Then that is how we will proceed.
A glanced to the darkness next to them where a blurry outline moved above the grass.
And here is the man we seek. A Nomen.
He emerged from the shadows at her call to greet them with a stern frown.
You are looking for something. You actually,
said Fritha quietly.
Everyone is retiring and you are on first watch, we came to find you. Well, here I am.
An Anomen fell into step behind them, trying not to let it rile him as the pair shared furtive glances. He knew it was not their fault. Fritha had done little outside telling the lies for which she was known and, for his part, Solifane had merely kept her silence as he himself was doing now. But it was as though the anger Anomen felt for the world and his lot within it was slowly poisoning him. Even his prayers were just words now, intoned without the comforting swells of pride and humility he used to feel when knelt before his God. All that remained was emptiness and betrayal, reciting words to a deity who did not seem to care. He recalled his worship at the shrine before they had left Amkithran, if it could be called that, knelt before the carved stone eye feeling nothing but a burgeoning hatred for the way it watched him, silently judging, never acting, the old priest's smiling face a mockery of everything he had suffered as the man had pressed into his hand more of the scented leaves for his lady. He did not know why he had even brought them with him. He should have just discarded the dusky green spears back in that dying village. But he had not, and that night had found him out in the plains, sat under a heaven of cold stars, fingers wet with the juices as he crushed them for the peppermint scent. He had not been allowed long enough to associate with anyone, he missed Brianna and he hated himself for it. She had come there to betray him, to see Fritha killed for her God's sake, and yet as much as he disparaged the others' doing, it was hard to separate her in his mind, Demonising Elund as the evil that lurked within an innocent Brianna. He snorted inwardly. It was likely more accurately described the other way around. Elund's act awakening in her some spark of goodness she never before realized she possessed. Anomen dipped his head, turning from the dot of firelight they were heading towards. He had felt a change in her, seen the indecision in her eyes, the tremor of doubt to her hands as she had raised the knife. Could it have been enough to save her? He would never know now. They arrived back to an all but empty camp. Valigar sat at the fire, a long stick of wood wedged between his legs as he whittled it down to the practice sword Anomen had heard him tell one of the others it was to become. The man sent him nod as he sat down, seemingly happy to continue their watch in silence, Fritha's voice small as she stooped to follow Solifane into their tent.
Good night, Anomen.
End of chapter.